Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Drew Aversa show. I am grateful to have my former professor here, Dr. David Victor from Eastern Michigan University, professor of international business and marketing. But most important, the man, the myth, the legend when it comes to international communications and helping people figure out their differences to get things done. Dr. Victor, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Drew. I appreciate being here.
I appreciate having you on the show, and you are the only professor that I have listened to nonstop, like a Siskel and Ebert review, sitting out of the chair. Your stories are fascinating, and you just continuously flow, talking about the differences of people from around the world, the challenges you've encountered helping multinational corporations patch things up between an expat coming in to manage a workforce that may have a prayer time at a certain hour and stopping manufacturing activities to Thailand and reverence to the king. You have quite a list of stories, my friend, and I figured we would just kick off this show with a fun story for everybody to highlight what communication is and some ways that it goes wrong.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to sharing more of that. But absolutely, communication is at the heart of international business, and we live in a globally integrated world economy. So even if you don't believe that your business is global, it actually is. Your competitors are going to be coming from there, and the potential market is much larger. Even in such large countries as the US and China and Japan, it's still much larger outside the country that you live in than inside. So, how we handle this is interesting because we often suggest that communication is a soft skill, a less important skill. And perhaps it is. If you don't have your hard skills, if you are, for example, an accountant and you cannot do accounting, it really is not a good fit. You need that. If you're an engineer and you have poor engineering skills, you're not going to be of value. But let us say that you're an excellent accountant, but you conduct an audit and you cannot communicate with the people that you are auditing. You not just the language, but you offend people, or they don't understand that you've asked a question because it's been asked so indirectly. The US is a very direct culture, so we're more likely to offend higher context cultures that are more indirect. Higher context cultures may be saying something as a direct order to you, but you may not even catch that it was a suggestion. If you're in that situation, it doesn't matter how good your accounting skills are, you can't get the point through the noise that is culture. Just as when we're speaking and the radio's up real loud and you may not hear each other over the sound in between you, well, culture can act that way as well. This goes with almost any profession, and yet we we frequently only discover this once we start working with other people. I think one of the best things that can be done is to proactively try to figure out what the cultural issues might be before you go. And this is basically what we discussed in your class.
So one of the hot topics today is this notion of unconscious bias. You see it in the headlines. It's like the latest HR buzzword that people are, investing millions of dollars in on training. So what is bias? What is unconscious bias? And then how does one shift their view in a sense? Because we're talking in a lot of ways hardwired psychology, belief systems, societal upbringings, whether in Saudi Arabia where you mentioned, if you say one thing your hand can be chopped off, to Singapore where there's still caning and different things. So obviously you don't want to say something that potentially is biased in a country like that if you're traveling and doing business, because you may find it very uncomfortable quite soon if the authorities come and get you. So how do you become, I guess, more aware of your thought, how you believe what you believe, and then relating and working with other people?
First, it's an excellent question. We always have unconscious bias. We actually have conscious biases too. And so, one of the first things to do is to acknowledge that you are coming in as a collective assumption of what you presume to be um, normal or acceptable behavior. And that shifts between culture to culture. One need not go so extreme as to say having your hand chopped off or being caned. However, we do, for example, in the US, have a tendency to go for extremes. So let's take the unconscious bias of taking something that is unusual but highly different. It stands out to us. That kind of issue, by the way, you may be surprised at, you may emphasize, but that's not going to get in the way of too many business interactions. In fact, it doesn't happen much, generally speaking. And by the way, if I'm from Singapore or Saudi Arabia, we talk about we live in a country where you're going to be working in a country where there's mass shootings all the time. Well, you and I both live in the United States regularly, and I've not actually been present in a mass shooting, and I'm fairly old. And I'm aware that they're there, but they're on the extreme end as to what gets shared in, say, a news story. So that's one thing. The other is to see to what level, what are the things that are culturally going to shift? And asking yourself these questions consciously before you react. So when someone responds, you say, I need a response right away. You are programmed to assume right away is similar to your own cultural level of what right away means. That differs, however, according to how little time you have. That may be occupational. Um, how long equipment takes to run. For example, a medical diagnosis right away can be a week. As for signing a document, that could be within a few minutes. And so we have a difference in that just in terms of the occupation. But the other is what the concept of right away means in a culture. Does it mean by the end of the day? And what is that day? Does the workday end at 9? Or does the workday end at 5? Does the workday stretch a little? Are you willing to do work after work time? All of those things might suggest a difference on why that document didn't happen right away. And then there's another step. What if I don't understand the language? I mean, I know enough to know what you said, but I'm afraid to write back to you. English is not my first language. You're judging me on my English. I need English technical skill. This has to be done in English. So I need time to have a translator take a look at what I've written to ensure that my grammar is right, that my words mean what they're supposed to do. So right away, maybe a delay of another day while I get someone to look at it, and so on. You may recall from when I had you as a student, I have a model called the LESCANT model. And this is the basis of much of what I've done. The model came out, I just had a 25-year anniversary of it. It came out in 1992 with a book called International Business Communication. But the last 3 years, I've still been using the model. For example, just this month, I had published the 7 keys to communicating in Mexico, communication skill approach with Georgetown University Press. And those 7 keys, well, that's still the 7 elements of LESCANT. A year before, I had one on Japan. Well, actually, 2 years before, I had it on Japan, and the year before that on Brazil, all with Georgetown University Press. Co-authored with Orlando Kelm, and then a different person this time for Mexico. It's Olivia Hernandez Poses from the Tec Monterrey, the Japan book with Haru Yamada. Brazil was just Orlando and I, but these 7 keys are still in place. And so what are they? Well, LESCANT is an acronym for 7 things that shift: language, environment and technology, social organization, contexting, which is how much of what we say is what we mean, face saving, respect, issues like that, contexting, authority conception, nonverbal behavior, and the understanding of time. as in what is right away. And how these things shift, that's where our unconscious bias is. Because I presume that these issues are the same all over, but they're not necessarily. They are filtered through these 7 elements. So one way to find unconscious bias is to ask yourself again and again, are the assumptions I'm making based on any of these elements? Could language be a factor in why the answer didn't come back? Could environment and technology? Not everyone has instant access to, say, Zoom or email or electricity. In parts of Pakistan, Lahore, regularly the electricity goes out daily. That's a major business city in Pakistan, and yet having things go out, especially not in the workplace, but maybe at home, is an expectation. Whereas in California, the chance that the electricity would go out is only if some natural disaster or something on that line occurs. We got social organization as a factor. What is the role of women? What is the role of difference? How I view different subgroups in the society or foreigners. Sporting events, asking me to respond to something during the World Cup doesn't bother me in the United States. It's a big deal in much of the rest of the world. Any number of factors on that, education and so forth. Contexting is, do I even understand that you've asked the question? Or, I wonder if someone might consider addressing something like this. Is a direct order in some cultures that are high context. In the US, I didn't even know something was asked of me. Instead, we say, please do this. Or in Germany, which is even lower context, you just say, do this. And that can seem a bit blunt. Authority conception, you may not have the authority to respond. And so forth. And then finally, nonverbal behavior. I may be saying that I will do something, but I am giving every indication that this is not what I mean by shaking my head or not making eye contact. But I can misread that. Making eye contact, for example, is a sign of respect in the US. In Japan, someone of lower status lowers his or her eyes to someone of higher status to show respect. And moving your head back and forth, which is no in the United States, is yes in Bulgaria. Or doing a head nod that is kind of a wobble is a yes in many cultures within India, and we can misinterpret that. Finally, time may be different across cultures. Time is not a given. We in the US presume our kind of understanding of time is something you can divide, you can waste time, you can use time well, it sticks to it, as opposed to time being tied to relationships. There's a balance between the who is asking and how fast or slow something is. In the US, it's when it was asked. How's that for an answer?
That's a well-rounded answer to a very difficult question that corporations seem to make a quick fix on one workshop on unconscious bias to bias. I think that is fantastic. And as we talked about earlier, to friends in Singapore and Saudi Arabia, yes, we understand those are not the norm, just as in the US we have our school shootings. But sometimes we have to throw those big things out there to cause a reaction in people, to shift them out of their unconscious state where they may think that, the Middle East is a certain way because of where they grew up in their environment or public policy around certain things and rhetoric that continue to unfortunately put polarized views of certain people, certain religions, certain things. When you get to these countries, as you and I have traveled throughout the world, people are people at the end of the day. We see the nonverbal of a smile, which is universal. We see happiness as social support, different things like food, water, access to education, the ability to learn. and whether these children are in, poverty in India, when they get access to education, they can start learning and reading books, and now with technology using the iPad, it's amazing, the experiences that I've experienced traveling, just in how human we really are, and all these things can be very complicated to address for certain, but I think there are just some universal factors that make us human.
Well, I agree that we should focus on the things that are shared. And there are generally more things that are shared than are different. It's the things that are shared, though, that are easier to address. The assumption, until proven otherwise, is that the things we share are shared by everyone. So smiling does mean we're happy, but it shifts radically from culture to culture as to how much smiling is accepted and when you should do it. Crying means that you are sad universally, but the degree to which you are allowed to cry in settings changes from culture to culture. In the United States, we tend to smile a lot, and it does vary by culture within the US, but we smile just being happy walking down the street. Smiling for no particular reason, no one is talking to you, no one has made a joke, can, in a non smiling society, look almost feeble-minded. It can look very strange. It definitely looks odd if no one's around. And if you're smiling just because we're talking, it can be quite insincere. So I looked at a culture like Germany, particularly northern Germany, and you can see that that would be pretty odd. Then you go to a place, you mentioned Thailand. Thailand's nickname is the land of smiles. And I'm not sure, but one of the programs we did at St. Mary's, I think I charted 12 of them. I remember getting a card of the land of smiles with different smiles charted. These are smiles that are quite foreign frequently. The smile that I'm happy, go, or the smile that I'm listening, go on. Those are very similar to the smiles in the US. But the smile that says you are an idiot, but I'm going to let you go ahead and finish this statement, or the smile that says, I have to show respect, but I'm feeling very uncomfortable here. Or there are many smiles in Thailand that are very much part of the culture and have a much stronger impact than what you are saying, since the communication is being done nonverbally. So yeah, we can go in and saying smile is a sign of happiness, but we don't have a smile of I'm deeply embarrassed, or a smile of you've got it coming. And that's another issue where we can easily come and assume that our own bias towards that. We need to be on the lookout continually. When you travel and you look around and you say, well, what does a normal office look like? What does a normal a classroom look like? One of the first things you start to notice is that, do the windows open or don't they? Are the floors covered with carpet? Frequently in the US, everything's soundproofed, as opposed to what's on the floor. Is it wood? Is it stone? What are the signs on the wall and why are they there? And these sort of things, where are the plants and what condition are the plants in? Or are there no plants? Those are all things that just in the environment you start to pick up on, and their absence or presence starts to strike you. So if I'm in Mexico and I hear people clicking on the floor, someone in high heels coming down first at all, you click, 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 click. I don't pay any attention to it, but it's very unusual in the US to hear people walking down the hallways. One reason is we keep the windows shut, and another is the floors are not made out of, say, stone. And that starts to be even there, just a minor difference of some sort.
So,
That kind of thing is kind of what we're talking about. You'd asked me the question, what do you do when you have unconscious bias? How do you find it? One thing is to check yourself, not just asking these questions, but I suggest making a list. You may have your listeners make a list. Just write down who are the 5 people that you would go to if you have a problem immediately at work. So take a moment and write those 5 down. And then when you do, go ahead. I'll wait.
All right. And even if you're an entrepreneur and you're self-employed, there are 5 people
There are
in your
5 people
life.
you can go
So
to, 5 people that you would turn to ask something about. Definitely if you're an entrepreneur, because you don't have employees right there. It's your choice now. It's frequently not that you're limited. And by the way, the concept that if you work for a larger corporation, the 5 people would come from where you work, that's an assumption. Who would you turn to?
phone a friend, everybody. Phone a friend, just like the game show right now. Phone a
Okay.
friend, get your 5 people. All right. So if you
Okay, so
got your
you've got the
5
5
people,
people. So now the question is, one, how many of those people are family members? If you are in the United States, probably none, maybe one. If you are in many other cultures that are much more family oriented, say Latin American cultures in particular, but many Middle Eastern cultures as well, chances are you have 1, maybe 2, even 5 of the 5 are related to you. So why do you choose or not choose family? How many of those people work in the same workplace as you? Are you limited in your work questions to those who are at the workplace? That tells you your orientation to work. How many of those people are the same nationality as you? If you pick 5 people, were they all from the United States? If they're all from the United States, what does that tell you about your base of understanding, who your go-to people are, if all of them are from the same culture as you? If they are from the United States, we're a diverse society. Are any of them immigrants? Are any of them of a different religion, race, age? How many of the people are the same gender as you? Do they include any people who are across a gender spectrum? Are they all pretty much the same gender spectrum that you are? So when you find that, and by the way, this can work with 10 even better. You say, well, if I went and I got a longer list, you find that you start to find who your unconscious bias is. You're checking yourself when you have an issue to discuss with people who are either similar or dissimilar to you according to that list. And that is your unconscious bias.
I love it. And I think the best way to get conscious is to travel and to see other cultures and to put yourself in situations that you may not otherwise do. And that was the one great thing about the international MBA program for me. And, I never thought in a million years I would travel to India, and being forced, in a sense, to go to India, to be in a city where, they're just polar opposites, just stark poverty. What we see in the U.S. right now is bad with the tent cities. India, it's on a whole nother level. The noise, the traffic, the pollution, things that we have to start thinking about as business leaders. Once we used to outsource all of our problems to these countries and make them polluted. Well, now we see the pollution here in the U.S. becoming more and more, and it's really one atmosphere, one global economy. So I think these things it was a fantastic learning experience. And then I got the bug for travel because I started realizing how much I was learning by actually being in these different environments and challenging me. And my list now is very diverse. I used to be a firefighter, so I'd say all the guys kind of looked like me. We all had trucks, different things, a very similar worldview on society, politics, religion, work ethic. And now having friends from all over the world, it's changed. It's
That's
very different.
that's exactly what I hope your listeners do as well. Travel is one way to do it. For those who are not as blessed as you to have the opportunity to have traveled, trying to get to travel is good. And you went in a situation of learning rather than as a tourist, in which much of what we're processing comes through the lens of an iPhone camera or something on that line. But you were interacting with people with an actual purpose. And so business travel or NGO travel or things on that line does make a difference as well. And your list broadened as your world broadened. And there is a difference between abstractly knowing India and showing up. India is not a single culture. India is pretty much the way Europe is trying to become. It's multiple nations with, you know, uh, all of these official languages. So if you're in Gujarat, where people are speaking Gujarati, it is entirely different than if you're in Punjab and people are speaking Punjabi. They're different cultures, they're age-old cultures. And it's not just language. Everything about them starts to become different. And languages that are related versus unrelated. So if I'm in Tamil Nadu, it is a difference again, and the language isn't even close to being related, not even the same family of languages. And what does that mean? Going in different circumstances. So when I've gone to India, I've gone healthy, and just past summer, I had injured my back, so I went to India on a walker, and going into fairly into the smaller towns on a walker, you start to become more aware of the difference of how easy or difficult it is to get around with and without, say, access for people with disabilities. One of the things you find is that people are much more likely to help you get up and over things, but the other is that there are very few ramps and the roads are uneven. And so even just your particular situation, I'd been to India before without ever thinking about that. And then my situation having changed, I thought about it very much. And that would hold for if I went to other parts of the United States, but there's that. And then, we talk about the pollution in India. Parts of India are terribly polluted, so are parts of the US. We just had a major toxic spill come from a factory that was condemned here in Michigan that went out on the expressway, green ooze it was called. And so if that's all I saw, I would think, oh my gosh, the Metro Detroit area is terribly polluted when in fact it's way less common than it was. The other is the concept of garbage. We don't have a lot of garbage that's left on the street. We tend to whisk things away so it's not around. We don't have natural ways of having the edible garbage like eaten by cows or dogs or other animals running through the street, that walking through the street. They seem quite natural in India. We don't have, and we also tend to pick up or have people pick up a lot of things like plastic bags or things on this line. And so we may say, oh my gosh, India is dirtier than the US. When in fact, India may or may not be dirtier. We're just not used to seeing plastic bags or cabbages dumped in the street or whatever it may be. That doesn't necessarily make things dirtier. And in fact, when you go inside buildings, it's often very clean because there are servants who are keeping the things clean. I mentioned plants. I was with a colleague who I won't name the place, but there was a plant in the office that we're meeting in, and the plant had a lot of dead leaves or dying leaves on it. He was from a country where servants are pretty common, and you would have someone check out the plant every day. In the US, the plant isn't even thought of. It's an afterthought. Let's stick a plant in the room, generally a plant that's hardy, and if it starts to have brown leaves on it, we don't think of the plant as part of the environment, an important part at least. And we don't, if you or I had a plant in an office, you or I would be the one taking care of the plant, not someone who follows around to make sure everything is clean and in the right place. India, they would.
I do love plants in an office, though. That is a nice thing. And one thing you did mention was, with the next generation of traveling, and people are looking at Instagram, and they're so tied to the phone and technology. And my tip I think, is get off the phone too when you travel, because being with culture, you have to be with the people and be in the experience of the now. And when you're so tied to technology, which is great, technology is great. It's a lot easier to communicate with Google Translate than 10 years ago when you're standing there and trying to go through a phrase book. So it definitely has their things, but just being present so you can take in the culture, you can take in the different experiences, because so many people I see, when they travel, they're so caught up in getting the next perfect photo as opposed to getting the next perfect opportunity to meet with somebody and to learn about their culture and to just sit there at a dinner table and maybe eat with your hands, or just something just so far off than you would have at home. So if you do travel, hopefully you get those opportunities, because I know you and I have shared stories of different experiences like that are, you just learn so much, and it really changes your view, your heart, and how you are as a leader. Now, one question I have for you as well is your advice to expats, because we talked about you all of a sudden you're here in the US, you might be going to a hospital where the floors are new, the walls are clean, you have a big TV, and next thing you need healthcare in a country and your shower is a garden hose run through the wall, as my friend encountered in Africa when he was in an African hospital, in the VIP suite. That was the VIP suite. So, some of these things can be very scary. I've had my own experiences, where you can't communicate the images, the scenery, the senses around you are different. The food is different. The noise level is different. So how do you do well as an expat coming into an environment that is extremely different? And I wouldn't say, US to Spain or Germany, those are still somewhat similar, but let's say, Africa, India, Nepal, in a rural village where you're doing some NGO work, perhaps. How do you do well in those environments?
Well, as with any expat experience, try to proactively get training in advance. Read up on it, talk to people from it. We live in the United States, which is still a place where people are from many, many different countries. If you find yourself likely to end up in a place you're going, seek those people out. Plenty of organizations that hook people up, and you should try and talk with people casually. If you know someone who's come back, especially let's say that you are following up on someone else's work, talk with that person. Be aware that the relationships may matter. One of the things we do, because relationships are very low level in the US, is we tend to focus on the details of the technology. For example, when we go to a hospital, we are much more concerned that the hospital look a lot like the hospital we have here. I want beeping machines, and I want fluorescent lights, and I want doctors in white coats. I don't know why doctors should be in white coats. They aren't all over the world. But one of the things that's important is in other cultures is the personal relationship, the person taking care of you. Having the concept that I am being treated as a unit, which is fairly common in the US, is extremely frightening for cultures where you come in and you build a trust relationship with the person who is taking care of you. I tell a story of, I had a goddaughter that's since passed away, but her mother's Brazilian, and she was here in the United States, and we had to take Gabriela to the doctor late at night, emergency room, and she made the doctor in the United States talk to her physician in Brazil before she would let the doctor take care of her daughter. In the US is in the front. First of all, you're questioning my competence. Second of all, I'm from the United States. We know any other country is not like us, and therefore not as good. That's a preconceived notion. It's not true. And the other is, why do you need to hear from a doctor who you know before you can trust me? Well, because they needed a personal relationship. So that's an answer right there on a fairly developed place with another fairly developed place. Again, finding out what the relationships are, it may be part of that culture. And it comes back here. And you mentioned the phone. That's great advice. Get off your phone while you're looking. On the other hand, try to look here too. Look around through other people's eyes. Taking visitors who are expats, who are your friends, or people who are here for short visits or whatever, and walking around town with them, you start to notice things. For example, when I was in San Francisco some years back, I did not notice the number of homeless people in San Francisco. However, the Koreans I was with, they noticed and they kept commenting on it. So here's another one. And I was walking past it, so heartrending to me that I am so blind that I didn't even pay attention. I did afterwards. And I tried to get someone involved, but I am able to block that out. Whereas if I was in India or Korea or whatever, I would be looking differently. But in my own culture, I may not look. And that's the other great thing to see what my own biases are and my own awareness. Lack of awareness in my own culture as it is seen through others' eyes is very similar to lack of awareness of my culture, of me, when I go to someone else's culture. So I urge, I think the phones are great. You and I are doing this by Zoom right now. It's way easier than me going out to the Bay Area. Just is. But I assume you're still in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I'm still here,
Yeah,
but
okay.
it would be a lot more
Okay.
fun if you were
So
here to get a meal
would
with you.
be a lot different thing. It would be a different interview face to face, but it would also be very inconvenient. So there's this, it's what you make of it. My being able to see you, even though you're just listening to this, I'm seeing you during this is affecting how I'm speaking. And that's a wonderful thing about technology. It's what we make of it. Drew, I want to thank you so much for having me here. I'd love to keep in touch with you and share with your listeners at other times. But I'm afraid, being from the US and being very time conscious, I actually have another appointment I have to get to. It's noon here and it's going to start. So I need to get going and just want to say thank you so much for having had me on.
Dr. Victor, always a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your words, your wisdom, your insight, and your humor with all of us today. And we look forward to having you back potentially on another show talking about communication in the global economy.